Well, I think he's a tiny, scared little man who's been scared since the moment he came into power 25 years ago. He operates out of fear, paranoia and fear. He thinks everybody's out to get him. Probably he's not wrong about that. And he's a scared little man, and so everything he does is out of fear. And this war is out of fear. He's scared of his own people.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've had Sir Bill Browder on the show. We've spoken about this 50-day deadline from Donald Trump to Vladimir Putin, and we've spoken about whether Putin is taking this seriously, whether Donald Trump will actually follow through with this, or if it's this taco trend all over again. We've spoken about these weapons that have officially arrived, or at least some of them have arrived in Ukraine. So we speak about whether Ukraine needs more, whether they need some more cruise missiles. So all that today on the Trump Report. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube page, or you can stream us as a podcast, wherever you get your podcast. So Bill Browder, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Great to be here.
Well, we haven't spoken since Donald Trump issued this 50-day deadline to Vladimir Putin earlier in the week. We've seen him say to Putin that he has 50 days to end the war, otherwise he risks further sanctions. But look, obviously that happened, and along with the fact that the United States has said yes to giving more weaponry to Ukraine, provided that NATO pays for it. But this 50-day deadline, Bill, do you think that this is Donald Trump again just delaying the inevitable? Should he just have done this already, given it's been 3.5 years?
Well, it's been 3.5 years, and this is the fifth ultimatum that he's made to Vladimir Putin. You remember, he's been saying 2 weeks here, 1 month there, et cetera, et cetera. This is the fifth time that he's done this. And I don't view this as any kind of change in Donald Trump's attitude towards Putin. I know a lot of people are reporting that's what this means. I view this as Donald Trump is got two things going on. One is that there is a competing piece of legislation sponsored by Lindsey Graham and co-sponsored by 84 Republicans and Democrats out of 100 senators, which threatens to impose 500% tariffs on countries that buy Russian oil. And that's a piece of legislation that if it were to go to vote, it would pass unanimously and it would be veto-proofed. And so in a certain way, what Trump is doing is he's saying to Lindsey Graham and all the other senators, I've got my own plan. We don't need to do your plan. And then he can do what he did after all the other ultimatums expire, which is nothing. And so I think that this is a not particularly helpful thing. I think it's particularly unhelpful that he's given Putin 50 days. Why 50 days? Why not 5 days? Why not 2 days? Why not a week? 50 days gives Putin pretty much a carte blanche to go and, lob projectiles and bombs and missiles on Ukrainian civilians during the most difficult time when there's a ground invasion already being organized. And so I don't view that as any particularly great thing. And furthermore, this idea that the United States is going to supply Patriot missiles. The United States was supplying Patriot missiles until Trump cut it off. It was already approved by Congress from the previous administration. Trump cut it off. And then all of a sudden he says, we're going to supply Patriot missiles. So just turning it back on. Oh, but by the way, Europe is going to pay. And so, yes, Ukrainians need those Patriot missiles more than anything because they're being bombarded by relentless attacks from Putin. But to sort of characterize this supply of weapons, which America's not even paying for, as some type of new Trump getting tough on Putin, I think is an overstatement for sure.
This sanctions bill from Lindsey Graham, the last time you and I spoke, I think Donald Trump had said he supported it, or at least greenlit it to Lindsey. But we were hoping that it was going to go through the Senate last week because senators were going to be coming back after their recess. We were hoping that this was going to be a priority as soon as it hit the Senate floor, that these 84 to 85 senators will pass it through, then it gets straight into Donald Trump's desk. But that hasn't happened so far. The latest is that it might get through in August. But Bill, as you mentioned, this 100% threat, this 100% tariff threat on Russian exports and goods from other countries trading with Russia, that is a separate threat to this sanctions bill from Lindsey Graham, which would basically hit any country importing Russian oil with a 500% tariff. So it's a larger tariff. But there is a world in which that these two threats could coexist at the same time. Bill, Donald Trump could have his 100% tariff at the same time as Lindsey Graham's 500% tariff. So I wonder, why are they just not doing these things right now?
Well, I've spent a lot of time in Washington working on legislation. The most famous piece was the Magnitsky Act, which imposed targeted sanctions on Russian human rights abusers. And I've seen how this game is played. And it's completely obvious to me, and we already have indications of this from various reports, which is that Trump didn't want this Lindsey Graham bill to go forward, and he told Lindsey Graham that. And so what the interplay between these two bills is that Trump is basically nodding to Putin and say, listen, I don't control the whole situation here. Congress is a separate power base, and they could force this issue. So let me run some interference for you. I'm going to buy you some time, and I'm going to put out something which makes me look tough, but at the same time, I don't have to follow through on it. 50 days can come and go. You can come up with some type of new negotiation or some kind of, like what Putin's been doing before with like various, well, why don't we have a task force and set up a committee and have various discussions and so on and so forth. And then the 50 days can come and go, and there you have it. And so this, in my opinion, is just Trump, giving a nod to Putin and saying, I'm buying you some more time, pal.
Well, Bill, other experts, or not experts, but analysts, would say the opposite. They would say that this threat from Donald Trump might be showing that Trump is done playing these diplomatic games with Vladimir Putin. But do you disagree with that?
Well, I mean, we all hope that that's the case. I mean, it's inexplicable how Donald Trump can be favorable towards Putin. It just doesn't make any sense. Why would anyone be favorable towards Putin? Putin's a monster. He's a murderer. He's victimized Ukraine. So we all hope that that's the case. But I've been studying him and Putin and Zelensky since this whole thing started. And, wishful thinking doesn't make it true. And so, I would love to be proven wrong. But my gut feeling is that this is a way for Trump to run interference for Putin. And Trump gets one big thing out of it, which is that it makes Trump look bad every time he sort of talks tough and then Putin doesn't do what he's supposed to do. And so this, by sounding tough right now, it doesn't make Trump look so pathetic, which is how Putin has made him look in the past. But I would not overstate the significance of this. And we'll see. I'm sure we'll talk before then, but we can regroup in 50 days and see whether I'm right. And I would really love to be wrong here. It would be great if all of a sudden there's a new direction in the Trump-Putin relationship where Trump is getting tough on Putin, as he should be. But I've watched this thing play out. Remember the day that Trump was inaugurated, he issued a tweet saying if Putin doesn't come to the table and negotiate a ceasefire, there's going to be tariffs, taxes, and sanctions on Russia. That was 6 months ago. Putin hasn't negotiated. Why 50 days? Why now? And it seems to me that this is more about the Lindsey Graham bill than it's about anything else.
What's changed between now and the inauguration, do we think, Bill? What changed that we haven't seen Donald Trump follow through? Well, we've seen this TACO acronym being published now and again about why does Donald Trump keep chickening out. He campaigned on the fact that he would end this war in 24 hours, and he actually has the tools to be able to at least get Vladimir Putin to the bargaining table, but he also has the tools to be able to force his hand. So what has changed since he actually became the president?
Well, I mean, nothing has changed. Vladimir Putin has no intention of stopping this war. Putin has his own reasons for this war, which have nothing to do with anything Donald Trump can offer him. Putin needs this war to distract the Russian people So they're not angry with him, and they're angry with Ukraine. That's what a weak leader does when they're worried about their own power base. And Trump, or I should say Putin, needs to stay in power, because if he's not in power, the Russian people will put him in jail and probably kill him. So from his perspective, he needs this war. And of course, it's very helpful to have a person who's nice to him in the White House. It's very unusual. In fact, it's unprecedented. And it gives him a lot of different leverage. I mean, if all of a sudden the Europeans were the sort of the junior partner, now they have to be the senior partner in supporting Ukraine. And the Europeans are not all that good at being a senior partner. They were always happy to rely on the United States. Now the United States has effectively backed off. As Trump said, America can sell Patriot missiles to Europeans who can pay for them. But he's not supplying any military aid to Ukraine now. And I can't imagine him going in front of Congress and saying, we need to approve another $50 billion for Ukraine. There's no way he's going to do that. And particularly, he's not going to do that when he's got all this other trouble going on with Epstein files and so on and so forth. He's got his whole MAGA base angry with him. The last thing he wants to do is give them something else to be angry with him about.
Well, the Kremlin is reporting that Putin is reportedly unfazed by Trump and the West's threats, vowing to keep the war going on until his own terms are met. Do you believe that he's not scared, Bill?
Well, I think he's a tiny, scared little man who's been scared since the moment he came into power 25 years ago. He operates out of fear, paranoia and fear. He thinks everybody's out to get him. Probably he's not wrong about that. And he's a scared little man. And so everything he does is out of fear. And this war is out of fear. He's scared of his own people. But at the same time, he comes from a world of the Russia is like a prison yard. That's his world. And he's the little guy in the prison yard. He showed up on the first day of prison, little guy in the prison yard, knowing terrible things were going to happen to him unless he made a point. And so he takes out a shank out of his shoe and stabs the biggest guy repeatedly in front of everyone, blood spurting everywhere. And that's been his approach towards keeping Russia people in line, as being the little guy with the shank. And so all of a sudden, there's all these things happening to him, sanctions and so on and so forth. He's got to look around at everybody and say, I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of anything. And that he's the little guy in the prison yard with a shank. And so he of course he's scared of all this stuff, but he can't show one iota of fear, because if he does, then he loses that the whole tough guy in the prison yard thing, which is how he stays in power.
But you don't think he actually believes Donald Trump's threats, do you? Because he's obviously been in this situation before. Do you think he's starting to lose credibility in what Trump threatens him with?
Well, I don't believe that Trump has really threatened him. I think Trump has threatened him wink, wink, and said, it's going to be okay, pal.
Bill, The Sun is reporting in conjunction with photos that they've published that multiple Russian soldiers have had their water bottles poisoned that were supplied to them on the front line. Now, this apparently took place in the Donetsk area. Multiple soldiers are in critical condition. The water reportedly came from Crimea and it was labelled aid. The Sun's reporting that this could be a Trojan horse supplied by the Ukrainian army somehow. No one knows how that could have happened. A Ukrainian source hit back, suggesting it's unclear whether this was actually poisoning or drug overdoses, with commanders possibly using the poisoned water story to cover up drug-related incidents. Now, regardless if this is true or not, Bill, but if it is true and this was a war tactic from Ukraine, not only is it incredibly ironic to be poisoning Putin's army, but does it show that Ukraine's army should just not be underestimated, that you're never going to be safe?
Well, Ukraine is the underdog here. Ukraine has 90% less resources to fight this war than the Russians do. They're the victim, and they have an existential risk here that if for some reason Russia succeeds, then the most horrific things are going to happen to the Ukrainian people. And so they're thinking every day about every possible way of holding it all together and fighting back. And of course, we all know about the unbelievable Operation Spiderweb, where they took out 1/3 of the long-range bombers, thousands and thousands of miles away from Ukraine, opening the truck roofs with the $500 drones to get rid of $7 billion worth of aircraft. And if they're doing this, and I've just read the same story that you've read, but I don't know if it's been verified. But if they're doing this, this is just one more clever way in which the Ukrainians are doing what they have to do. I don't think anyone has any sympathy for Russian soldiers that are going to try to come into Ukraine and kill Ukrainians if they've been poisoned before they get there.
Especially, Bill, as I've spoken to a journalist in Kyiv multiple times, and he went out with the Ukrainian army last week for a couple of days, or I think it was about 10 days actually, and he sent us videos that are on our other show, Frontline, where soldiers explained to him that they've had chemical weapons used on them by the Russian army. So, it's a tit for tat situation. The Financial Times reported this week that Trump asked Zelensky on his July 4th phone call with him. He said, Volodymyr, can you hit Moscow? Can you hit St. Petersburg too? Zelensky's answer was swift and direct. Absolutely, we can if you give us the weapons. Trump backed the idea and told him to make the Russians feel the pain. Trump and his team have reportedly now said that they've told Zelensky not to target Moscow, even though they would obviously need a Tomahawk cruise missile to do so. But should Ukraine look at targeting Moscow, Bill, or do you think that's too much of a risk that it could escalate this war even further?
Well, if Putin is targeting Kiev, then Ukraine should target Moscow. I mean, how does that escalate? Ukraine has been forced since Biden was president to fight with one hand tied behind their back, and that's not right. I mean, if every day major civilian populations are being attacked, I'm not suggesting that Ukraine attacks civilian populations in Moscow, but they should bring the war to Russia. If the Russian people are so indifferent to what's happening to Ukrainians, the Russian people should understand that this is their country that's at war, and there will be casualties on both sides.
The US obviously approved sending these Patriot air defenses systems this week, which some are in transit now, Bill, but some have arrived as of today. But there is no confirmation on whether the US or NATO allies will send Tomahawk cruise missiles and other long-range missiles. I spoke to that journalist in Kyiv, and he said the Ukrainian army very much desperately needs these long-range missiles. So should the UK, EU and the US be prioritizing this as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's basically three things that Ukraine needs in order to tip the scales in their favor. They need offensive weapons, they need defensive weapons, and they need money. And we could change that for them. We could confiscate the $300 billion that's of Russian central bank reserves that are held in Europe and the West. We could use that money then to purchase offensive and defensive weapons for Ukraine. And at that point, then the probability shifts towards Ukraine. And if we don't do that, and Ukraine were to lose this war, then Europe will be at war. NATO will be eventually at war with Russia. I have no doubt that Putin will make a move on Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania, and those are NATO allies. And so it's very much in our interest, no matter how much people complain about the cost of this war, the cost of supporting Ukraine is much, much smaller than the cost of us directly being engaged with Russia. And this is all without the loss of a single life of Britain, the United States, any of these European countries. I mean, we can send some money to Ukraine, let them do the fighting, let them fight off the invader without any loss of life. It just seems like a no-brainer to me.
Well, one of Putin's allies and the former Russian president, he warned that Russia should respond in full if the West gets more involved in this war. He said we need to act accordingly to respond in full and, if necessary, launch preemptive strikes. Bill, do you think that these threats should be taken seriously? I only ask in the sense that if the West and the US, EU, NATO, they come together to actually sanction Russia, and just in terms of the fact that the military capabilities of all of these NATO allies together is far greater than Russia's, should these threats be taken seriously, that Russia would strike outside of Ukraine?
Well, so far they haven't struck outside of Ukraine, and they've been making these threats since the beginning of the war. This is very much of the boy crying wolf. They've been saying this at every step of the way. And one of the things that was most frustrating during the Biden presidency was that he believed these threats, and he was forcing the Ukrainians not to use the full might and weight of their military in fighting back out of fear of, quote, escalation. And I think that Putin understands very clearly that it would be an absolute insanity to launch an attack on the West because, if he can't beat Ukraine, how the hell is he going to beat NATO when there's an attack on the West? It's just, he's smart enough to know that that's suicide to do that, and he won't do it.
Bill, just finally, according to Reuters, Russian sources said that Putin won't stop the war because of these economic disruptions, such as these sanctions, such as these tariffs. He said he'll keep going. But, if these sanctions do come into play, oil and gas makes up 30 to 40% of Russia's federal budget. Losing China and India, which would be the countries that get hit by these 500% tariffs, should Lindsey Grahams' sanctions bill go through, that would wipe out about $150 billion of Russia's annual revenue, which is enough to cripple military spending. So when Putin and and the Kremlin say that sanctions and economic disruptions are not enough for Putin to stop this war, is that just absolutely fake?
Yeah, I mean, basically, Putin, he can say whatever he wants to say. The reality is that he needs resources to fight the war. The only place where he has resources left is from the revenue generated from the sale of oil and gas. If he can't sell oil and gas, he'll be out of business, and he has no money. He won't be able to fund the war. And the only way to stop Putin is either to defeat him militarily or bankrupt him. And so it's hard to imagine that Ukraine is going to have the military capacity to defeat him. And so the next best option is to bankrupt him. And that's what this Lindsey Graham bill is all about. And I think the U.S. should get off their hands and just pass legislation and get it done, because that would end this war, because Putin wouldn't have any money left.
So, Bill Browder, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you.